I am Tatar Khan, and today I will be talking about historical novel Captain Alatriste by Arturo Perez-Reverte. I have previously made a video on this novel, but I recently revisited the novel and decided to redo the video. The novel was published in 1996 and is set in the period of the rule of Philip IV of Spain. This is a period that is known as the Golden Age of Spain. The book's English translation is very good and narrative flows naturally. The narrative style is that of a recollection of a past by the narrator. As a result, certain embellishments are added that result in the longer narrative that might be a bit too long for some. The book was written by author as a response to inadequate coverage of the period of Golden Age of Spain in schools textbooks in Spain. The author's daughter was going to school at the time and he looked at her textbook. So the book was written to rectify this issue. Therefore, some of the additions to the text of mentions of famous painters, poets, and playwrights and citations of their works could be explained as further attempt to add educational value to the text. They do add to the length of the text, but this is not an issue here. Although how they are tied into the narrative, I'm not sure, beyond giving us some basic development of character in terms of their motives and romantic notions. So, let's get into the characters of the book. Diego Alatriste is our protagonist. He could be named in honor of writer Cialtiel Alatriste, with whom Arturo Perez-Reverte is acquainted. However, as based on my experience, names of the characters have meanings, so after playing around with Alatriste and translating it from Spanish, I came up with a meaning of in sadness, after I broke it up into Alatriste, which fits as the character is sad, and the whole narrative in the book has a melancholy tone to it that is present throughout the whole narrative. Also, our protagonist bears an honorary title of a captain. Clearly, Nautilus uses this as a device to give the character some weight in the reader's eyes as a person who knows the way of the world. Inigo Balboa is a page to Diego Alatriste, who is also the narrator of the book. I have not been able to come up with a meaning for his name. Reference to the famous Spanish explorer Balboa, maybe, perhaps, but I don't see how it is relevant to the narrative of the book. We also are told that he's Basque. How is that relevant? How that affects the narrative? I'm not sure either. The opposing character to Diego Alatriste is an Italian swordsman who is called Gualterio Malatesta. Playing around with a translation of Malatesta, I came up with the evil mind when the name is broken into Malatesta. Given that the character is antagonist and the actions of the character in the book, it does seem appropriate for that character. Although the ending of the book does suggest that the character is not just evil but has a certain honor code to him as well. Angelica de Alcazar is a romantic interest of the young Inigo Balboa. Even though her name means angel, as Inigo says that she was evil. Her role in the book is something of a femme fatale for Inigo. Her name could mean an angel in a castle, so meaning that a person who is unattainable, which is kind of appropriate given the difference in social class between Inigo and Angelica. Alcazar is a derivative of Arabic Alcázar, which means fortress. The rest of the characters are historical figures and are so represented with certain embellishment as required. The reason for embellishment is that the author was inspired by Alexandre Dumas' Three Musketeers series of novels. Well, the book actually mentions some of the characters of these novels, and then there's a following things that should also be kind of allusions to this fact. Action happens in the same time period. Church is opposing faction to one of the other factions at court, similar to Three Musketeers. There's a weak king. Action is provided in the book through fencing, and Diego Alatriste, our protagonist, has a relationship with a female innkeeper. As a result, some embellishments might be explained by the fact that Alexandre Dumas did the same thing in his novels, and the author here is pretty much attempting to do the same thing. The major theme of the novel is that of the contrast between the nobles and the commoners. The nobles engage in these romantic actions for purposes of wooing their lovers, having exciting adventures and high political reasons, while the commoners end up suffering due to their actions. Diego Alatriste finds people he's acquainted with as those hired to oppose him, because both sides hired out themselves for money to survive. The minor theme tied to this and connected to the major theme is that while it appears to be the peak of Spanish dominance and wealth, in reality most common people are actually anything but wealthy, and all the wealth and power are wasted by the elites in very little games that they play there for political reasons or because they want to just have some kind of exciting adventures. There are also themes of friendship, loyalty, and honor in this book as well. Now let's talk about the fencing mentioned in the book. Overall, the fencing description in the book is very good. It shows that the author is familiar with fencing, because otherwise, how would the author know some things like the fact that thrusting through the quillons of the sword is not done intentionally, rarely happens, and could mean trouble to the person who actually did the thrust. Now, that can only be known through a person who actually practiced some fencing. It is something that I have been in personal situations, as I do historical European martial arts, and so I do fence, and I've been in those situations where my sword would go through the basket of the opponent and then would get stuck there, causing certain problems. The only way to know this is actually to have experience, as far as I'm concerned. Or actually to have somebody tell you that. Well, let's go through the rest of the section, the rest of the fencing that we have in the book, and I will be talking and discussing it as a person who does fencing himself, and also because I did kind of experiment with all the situations that I described in the book, as well as talk to other Kima practitioners who are more experienced than I to get their opinion on this kind of situations. So, overall, I'm gonna say that descriptions of use of dagger and sword in fighting is pretty much correct. It's appropriate to the period. It did happen. We have manuscripts that describe how to actually fight with sword and dagger. The use of dagger to slash the opponent, as it's described in the book, well, I guess it's possible, but in my experience, the dagger in this case is usually used more to stab rather than to slash. It's actually more used as for defensive purposes than for offensive purposes. But again, maybe there are possibilities where you can get in situations where you can slash with a dagger. Mentions of a fight where characters uses a sword and a knife against a sword and dagger armed opponent. We have that in the book, and the character does drop a knife. Now, there's two schools of thought about this. One is that you don't want to go against a person who has two weapons with just one weapon, so a knife should be held, but at the same time, a knife does not have any guard on it. Therefore, a sword can easily slide along the knife and just really cut the hand. So, specifically cut the fingers that are holding onto the knife, right? So, in that case, it's not very useful. We do have character dropping the knife, so it's actually a completely legitimate thing to do in this situation. Use of a dagger to defend thrust. That is a standard response quite often. You can use that. I've seen it done. I've seen it done also where defense of a thrust was done with a hand. It's also possible. Use of palm to protect the face. I'm not so sure about that, since how would this work? Since the sword can go easily through a palm, not exactly certain exactly what was the situation there specifically being described, and that's something that the author actually does. He does not provide a play-by-play instructions of what's going on or in terms of fencing, so I think in that way it's a bit better because it allows for the reader's imagination to work, as well as the situations where there are person who knows fencing will go and be able to say like, well, this is wrong because using this solution to this problem or so on, like there's a better way to do it. Rather, the author here does not provide enough details to go ahead and make it like a play-by-play fight where people can critique the actions of each fencer in the fight. So let's get back to the rest of the fencing here. Fighting with a sword versus sword and dagger. That's we had a situation before where the character drops a knife and decides to fight a person with a sword and dagger just using their sword. Now that is again like it's possible. It's a very difficult situation to be in. I tried it. It's not easy, as opponent has two weapons against your one. Really, I don't see any kind of advantage to the person with a sword, or I see that the person with a sword will eventually die because, well, it's very difficult to hold off the opponent. I talked to people who have more fencing experience, as I said, well, it's very difficult. They said it's possible to hold off, but it's extremely difficult. In this case, I think what's happening here is that the author is trying to show off the character's abilities and skill, and so that's why they include a situation where the character is able to hold his ground while using just a sword against sword and dagger. Now moving on, so we have a disarming of a sword while fighting with a sword and dagger. Again, that is something that is possible, but not a lot of manuscripts actually deal with this kind of a technique. Not a lot of them mention that kind of situation where you would be disarming a person. You see, the situation where you're fighting with a sword and dagger, quite often the best disarm is to cut the opponent's hand, usually somewhere at the wrist, so you're not going to be really disarming the opponent. The only good kind of a situation, or what's called a fencing play, that kind of similar to disarm I found was in Capaferro, and you can see it here on the screen right now, and I guess it is possible to kind of make this into a disarm, but in Capaferro the play is actually still focuses on the fact that the opponent is being skewered at the same time. So what I've been told, again consulting with other hero practitioners, is that there are better things to do than to disarm an opponent usually, and so it's not something that you would do when you're fighting, unless you really want to disarm an opponent. There's also the whole idea of fighting in the dark. I would say that's a very difficult situation. It happens quite often in the book. People fight in the dark. It's a very difficult situation because you have almost no visual references, because it's very difficult to see a fast moving sword in the dark. And in the end, that means you do have to stay crossed on the sword to make sure that you know where the opponent's sword is, which means you're also very close in distance, and that again complicates the whole fight. To me, again, it shows that the author is trying to show us that the protagonist is a very skilled swordsman because he's able to successfully fight in the dark. So overall, I think it's a very good book because it presents interesting narrative with a very well-developed theme that leaves an impression on the reader while they're reading it, or they actually kind of can walk away with that ideas later on and kind of think about them. At the same time, there's a certain amount of entertainment provided through fencing action, and fencing adds to the fact that it's a very cool book. So overall, it's a very good and a very cool book. Thank you for watching and listening. If you like this video, please like it. If you didn't like it, don't like it, and please subscribe.